I guess the best place to start in that continuum is ultimately um, all of us end up producing something, whether it's for a client because we're in an agency or it's our boss if we're at a brand. And that production could just be content. It could be, an article. It could be a blog post. It could be a social post. It could be video. It could be memes. Or it could be earned media outreach that you hope to secure. And AI, in its first kind of introduction to the mainstream, has really overly indexed probably on the produce, the production, right? Generative AI, text to video, text to text to creating a byline, text to creating a pitch. And I think that that is going to kind of reach it's going to have a shelf life, or it's going to reach a watermark in that it can only be so good. And it's not even that good, which is great because you want to be the human in the loop. So it's a good for a first draft or a start in any of that. And what I'm trying to focus folks on is the real power of impact and impact of AI on comms is going to be around being more predictive, otherwise known as cognitive AI. So how do I know what the next trend is before my competitor does? So I can actually create space to lean into that conversation first, so I can have first mover advantage. How do I know what the next threat is based on the geopolitical environment, the regulatory environment, the competitive environment? How do I take, from a crisis standpoint, all the things that could happen, possibilities, and turn them into probabilities? And the only way to do that, and we've never been able to do that before, is now you can use AI to actually analyze similar crises in the past or issues that the same or other companies and other industries have dealt with. It could be a government enforcement action. It could be unplanned executive succession. It could be a product recall. It could be a labor dispute, you name it. And you'll now have scaffolding. You'll have access to scaffolding that you didn't have before to create a more informed approach to dealing with that crisis if it becomes one. One, to determine the likelihood of that crisis, but two, how to address it based on real data, not just instinct. So that's all another way of saying, how do you backstop your instinct with data, right? So, there's generative and there's predictive. And then the prescriptive part is kind of what we do. That no one's there yet, and there's a lot of promise, and this is what it excites me too. I don't know if in my life I'll ever see it, but AI in its truest form is self-learning. It's this loop, just like your brain, at least for some of us. Maybe not my brain anymore. It's supposed to, you're supposed to learn, and then and be iterative, which is like our business. So currently, you cannot and it won't be very positive. It won't be performing the way you'd want it to. You could ask, Copilot or Gemini to do something. And if you said draft a press release, it's going to tell you how to draft a press release. It's not going to do it for you. And if it does, it's going to be very generic and very bad. The reason why is it hasn't had the experience and the training data to know how to write a press release in a way that generates interest because it hasn't learned you yet. But over time, these AI agents will be able to learn our language, our behavior, how we think, tether that to the market environment, and then help us think through problems and solve problems and give us options and scenarios. In the same way that we're doing that now in real time, it'll help give us five different campaign strategies, optimal timing on launching a certain campaign, or how to address a crisis, or how to reach out to a certain influencer. I mean, so we have all of the inputs, but we don't have that connective tissue yet in AI, that neural network. We're still the connective tissue, which is why I always like to say that we're human-led, AI-fed.
Hmm.
And I don't know if I really want it ever to be fully prescriptive because that's our job. But let's start with let's try to fix the deficit of what we had, right? Which is data. And data is a deficit. And that's why I don't always use the word AI. I'm also just talking about data and how we've been starved for it until now. And now, we've always complained. It's like when people say, how do you know, give me a KPI. How do you know it's working? You're like, oh, it's working. But it's very squishy. And now, to your point about outcomes, we'll be able to look at baseline data. It could be share of voice. It could be sentiment. It could be sell-through data that's in a CRM system like a Salesforce. and then overlay what we're doing on top of it to then actually show communication effectiveness. So I was just on a client tour last week in Germany and Switzerland, and I met with some of our major clients, Siemens, Bayer, FIFA, um, you know, uh, UBS, and they all are very interested in figuring out how we can also use AI to measure communications effectiveness. That is like a holy grail. It's been something we've all been looking for and wanting. And we're not there yet, but we're getting there. We're edging our way there because we never had the data before that we do now. Sorry, it's a long answer, but hopefully that was fulsome.
That's exactly what I was hoping for, Aaron. The when I use Claude a lot. I use ChatGPT, of course, but
Yeah.
what I even use it in writing the book. And I'll tell you, you kind of I kind of struck on something that you said, the relationship that you actually create with this AI force, so to speak, or Claude, whatever you want to call it, is one in which I actually have a dialogue, and what I'm attempting to do is I'm attempting to train it with my information, and I'll download my information and I'll put things in that I want to write about the book. I probably put that
Right.
PDF that you did, for example,
Hmm.
and it'll give it some context. So I think the whole idea of agentics then becomes, how do we actually focus these so they become much more purposeful for us? That
Right.
makes a lot of sense to me. I think that's and the human-led AI-fed concept. One of the things I think that we have a problem with, and I want to get across to the students in this course, is that there is this technology training talent Venn diagram that says, how do we bring those components together? Because those are the components that are going to allow
Yeah.
us to actually generate any kind of desirable outcomes, right? So how
Yeah.
do you give me a few words on the idea of human led and AI fed? I know you already have talked and addressed that a little bit, but
Yeah.
for example, when you talk to clients and when you talk to companies like Bayer or UBS or whoever, what do they, what do you offer them? What can you say to them? I think this is coming.
Well, what they want and what I offer sometimes are the same thing, but they're, in our world, we call it requirements. So companies like that and many others are looking at trying to use a Gemini or a Microsoft Copilot agent to sit on top of their, I'll call it an LLM, but their SharePoint, right, where all their files are, so that they can um, both draft content that's compliant or that's brand compliant. But sometimes then the problem is, and what we're trying to sort through with them is that then it becomes very overly commercial. It's like, every time BMW says they're the ultimate driving machine, like a reporter's eyes would roll to the back of their head. Like it's just very self-serving, and that's not what PR is about. So part of it is that. Part of it is also they want to be able to um, use an agent or prompt on top of a corpus of data that we've created already that's analytics. And they might say, okay, tell me about, tell me what our shareholder sentiment was on the day that we also announced this, new component for our cars, or this new sensor or this new chip. And what do you think the correlation is between that announcement and shareholder value? And then what about industry analyst sentiment? And then put a chart together for me. It'll be like that kind of stuff. So the actual compiling and the compiling and the visualization of the data itself is always going to be partly human and then partly algorithmic. But then what they want is they want to be able to access that data within seconds without having a human involved, so that they can pull a report together, a dashboard for a board meeting, for an internal meeting, or for an investor, or whatever it is, without having to call their agency or ask somebody on their team to then go do all that work. So um, part of it is like I call it like this instant on, Instapot type thing, right? But you still have to fill the pot, and you still need humans and algorithms to fill the pot. It's not going to do it for you, and nor should it, because there's too much nuance and too much judgment involved in our tradecraft, I think.
Yeah, the idea of this stream from this flow from data streams or lakes, this whole gathering of information
Yeah,
and storing it someplace, and then actually forcing that through an algorithm that would then do the hard work, so to speak, of saying, boy,
yeah.
I mean, I remember a day when we never had enough information or data, and now we just have too much. So
And a lot of it's and the other challenge is a lot of it's garbage. Like obviously you want to capture more than less, but if you capture so much and so much of it is waste or irrelevant, then that also becomes a lot of effort and energy to filter out the garbage so you can get to the noise, you can get to the signal, so to speak. So that is the other challenge that we all face. And before, I'd say 2 years ago, we were using Boolean search to determine the right information to bring into a data lake or to monitor. But now they have something called vectoring where they're literally triangulating words so that it's inferential AI, and that's really cool. That's a huge leap for us, and nobody talks about it. And we're deploying it. And you're never going to be perfect. You're either going to miss some things or you're going to have too much data, but it is more accurate than it has been before, and it's only going to get better. It's only going to get better.
well, that's a fascinating area because that's really what AI LLM does. I mean, that's really what this
Mhm.
technology is doing. This technology, and that's what this course is about, is how do we then triangulate the data? I mean, the idea of saying that I've got reams of knowledge is one thing, but being able to actually put that together the way that LLMs work and packaging, so to speak, the data. So I'm not really excluding anything by a word.
Right,
I'm including things by concepts that I can relate to or that will actually matter in developing the
right.
outcome. That's an
Yeah,
amazing breakthrough, isn't it? I mean, that
it's
is,
huge.
yeah. So tell
It's
me,
huge. And related to that, just before I forget this point, because I don't think I made the point strong enough in that lecture a few weeks ago. This concept of GEO, generative engine optimization versus SEO, it's basically right now the LLMs that have deals with major newspapers and high authority media outlets, they're going to rank media coverage above brand language, actually, which is really, really interesting. So it means that earned media is going to have a second life, a whole nother second life because of generative, because of these engines. Um, and it also means that the press release is actually coming. Everything that's old is new, right? We thought the press release is dead. Now it's new because of this. I thought that monitoring and analytics, I thought that was a commodity business, but now because of missed this and malinformation, it's important again, right? So you do that, and then you couple it with this post-literate kind of postscript world of videos and memes and images and kind of short burst comments influencing reputation. We need a whole new tool set to be able to track this stuff and be proactive about it. It's fascinating. I think it's the most exciting time to be in our business, quite frankly. And I've been in it
was
32 years.
is that what profit is doing? Is that's what you're focused on, right? I mean,
Yeah, we have three areas. One is maximizing influencers for discovery and engagement and creators using, across the seven main social network platforms. So we are able to look at 500 million influencers and then match the right one to who you want to engage with, either on a paid or unpaid basis. The other is GEO optimized or AI optimized media relations. So using AI to find the right reporter and one that's going to actually improve your standing inside of Gemini and other search because it's going to be a high authority outlet. And the third is AI powered media analytics and news and monitoring. So we use AI to discover and summarize articles, and then we use humans to analyze them. AI still can't analyze it the way we would expect it to be analyzed, and it can't action against it either. Humans still have to action against it. So those are kind of the three ways, among others, that we're kind of bringing AI to the practice, to the workflow.
so there's another piece that that's beautiful, by the way. I think that's what that brings some relief to the practitioners who have
Yeah,
been.
and I was a practitioner. I spent my whole life doing this. I would never want to. I would say it's not going away. It's changing. That's all.
Well, you bring up something in that that I also struck me. How do we come communication engineers? And I think you actually
Yeah.
copyrighted that term. That's so the whole idea of of your agent and then flowing to tasks and to walk me through that a little bit because that really involves the tech stack and
It
and
does.
think about Martech. That's what it really began as, the whole tech stack.
Hmm.
And one of the things I want
Yeah.
to kind of delve into is, so we've got AI, which has got everybody's dance floor right now, populated, but there's all this other background stuff that is there that we have to be able to find ways to integrate with, as well as the
Yeah.
people. So if you could give me a little bit on that, because I thought that was fascinating.
Hmm. Yeah. A couple of years ago, I wrote an op-ed in this marketing trade publication called The Drum. It was actually January of 23, so it's 2 years ago, more than 2 years ago. And I spoke about AI and the rise of communications engineering. And if you really think back, even to like when I got into this business, where I was literally sending press releases, not sending press releases through the postal service, and I was pitching over this phone, over a analog phone line. Um, you know, um, Everything that we do as communicators is actually engineering because by definition, we're behind the curtain. We're creating structures and code and scaffolding around stories and ideas and narratives that we're trying to get out into the mainstream or sort of reach stakeholders, right? And the engineering part comes in where we're now able to use technology to help us pinpoint and understand which audience to go after as in a faster, more efficacious way. And it's a mindset, not necessarily a skill set, but it means that you need to understand stats, you need to understand data visualization, you need to understand how to prompt, not just write. It means you need to be a critical thinker. It means that you need to understand theater and production because of video is such a powerful tool now to tell stories. If you look at the rise of YouTube, the rise of streaming versus linear TV, and it means that every time you make a decision, you have to ask yourself, what data point did I find and where did I find it to help uh, backstop or direct this decision versus just my gut. And that's a big sea change for us as communicators. It's been in advertising marketing and performance marketing world forever, but now we're becoming performance communicators, performance marketers, and that's what I mean by communications engineers.
Performance meaning outcomes that are desired, and you actually understand how you got there. Uh,
Yes.
so many times, and I've been in the business a long time, and not to the extent that you have, but to the point of saying, I got a good result. The client's happy. Damn if I know exactly how we got there, and therefore
Yeah.
I can't repeat it as readily, right? Isn't that what?
Right. It's not right. That's interesting. Yeah, you're right. It's not as repeatable. I kind of liken it to, I used to, when I was a kid, I used to play billiards all the time. I love pool. And how often in a game of pool, there's a certain percentage of your shots that you make that are deliberate, but some of them are just luck. I'm like, holy shit, and it's lucky you didn't get the eight ball in, but you're equally as lucky because you got two of your stripes in, but you didn't plan it. It just happened, and you can't repeat that again. It's impossible. But there's portion of what we do that is repeatable. I'm trying to make more of it repeatable. I think that's a really interesting point that you make.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the areas I think that a lot of practitioners are trying to figure out, because the frustration that we have gone through in our careers is that when it's lucky and you're happy, and when the client's happy, I mean it's the end of the day, right? No, it's not,
Hmm.
because they'll want it
Right.
tomorrow. I tell
Right.
youngsters a lot of times, I say, when you run an agency, the one thing you can be sure of when you wake up in the morning is that you've got 600 requests and ability to fill about 10 of them. So I
Correct.
mean, how are you going to use technology? How are you going to use better thinking? How are you
Hmm.
going to be able to take people that have had 10, 15 years of experience and they have a gut feel, but they want it, as I think you use the term, backstopping it?
Yes.
And that's really what you're attempting to, and what you're doing with profit. I mean, you're
Hmm.
trying to find this
Yes.
mechanism that says, how do we structure this so that I can go into a client and say, look, I cannot necessarily predict that you're going to become a billionaire tomorrow, but we can
Right.
make you a little richer. you know,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
really,
Or I can tell you that, your story idea is going to have very little success unless we recraft it this way, because I ran it through different scenarios in the cloud before I went and did it in real life. It's
Wow.
like pitching. It's because it's so iterative. And again, there's no guarantees, but at least I have charts and graphs and simulations to show them that aren't just like, I think, I maybe, I believe, it's I know, or we know that, so starting sentences with I know or we know versus I think, I believe, I'm not sure, we'll see. That's why PR people are typically in the back of the bus and not driving the bus. Not and that's why we have smaller budgets, not the bigger budgets, because we lack certainty and we live in this world of ambiguity. And I get it, that's part of the art, but there's a little more science we can add to it. That's why I'm so excited about these things. And as a communications engineer, you're waking up in the morning and you're saying to yourself, how do I move slow to move fast?
Mm,
Like slow, smooth, smooth is fast
mhm.
versus you've got these young kids at agencies for like on 6 or 7 accounts. It's all very transactional. They're just blasting shit out, throwing spaghetti at the wall, hoping something sticks. They're not thinking anymore. I was trained in a very different way. I always said I didn't want to be that guy who's like, well, back in my day. But in the early 90s, when I was getting trained by people like Hal Warner and Joe Gleason and Bob Feldman and um, they taught me the anatomy of a good story idea. They told me not to be afraid to pick up a phone and to use my voice to pitch a story, because the worst thing that can happen is they hang up. They're not going to punch me over the phone line. And it forced me to think because I actually had to talk to a human and pitch a human versus text a human. The stakes were higher and it was a little scarier. So actually, I became better. It's like people playing tennis, somebody on the other end of the line who hits as hard as you do, you're going to hit harder. We don't have that anymore. So therefore, our performance kind of goes down. And we've created this very complacent, commoditized culture of people who just don't understand. So the weird part is that we're using technology to move forward. We're looking back towards first principles of how to actually use data and take your time to actually build a really good narrative.
You talk about pitching stories, and one of the things that I think I finally discovered at some point in my life of talking to editors and writers and so forth and beat reporters is they are as interested in you telling them what might be interesting as as you are interested in having them say something that's interesting that would be
Correct.
benefiting your client. And that's what
Yeah.
you just summarized the
Right.
whole notion that says those old dogs, so to speak, that knew the way that around. They did it through instinct, and not what we're trying to
Yeah.
do is we're trying to actually find some a little bit more granularity to understanding the specifics. Because something else that you mentioned is that there is so the whole idea that there's 600 requests and 10 that can be completed is
Right.
in the core of it all. I mean, I cannot waste time uh,
No.
pitching an idea that this might have some legs, and maybe the reporter will find it interesting, and maybe the reporter does find it interesting, but it goes nowhere with the audience. And if
Correct.
you can actually say, look, it's going somewhere with the audience if we talk about this, and I can actually
Yeah.
exploit my client's product or my client's idea, then we now have, well, that's what you're talking about doing with the data, moving to an algorithm, moving to
Right.
actually using human substance, the
Right.
grit of the mind that says I can connect those things, because
Right.
that's one of the things I think that algorithms fall short sometimes, and that's why SEO finds short. Tell me if I'm wrong, but most of SEO got hijacked by the manipulators, by the black hat guys,
Correct.
and it just
Totally.
so where does that take us?
They pack every website, every press release with SEO words they think that are going to rank higher in search engines. And shame on PR people for actually forcing that and also promoting that, because we shouldn't have fallen into that trap, but many of us did. The other thing is we're actually bringing back the human algorithm. Like when we first started in this business, we were a human algorithm because the back and forth you had with a reporter on the phone, they don't want to send you an email, and you learn as much from them as they're learning from you. So you can go back to your client and you might come up with a different idea. They might send you somewhere else, but they're not going to take the time to email you back and be like, "Oh, thanks, blah blah blah." It's easier to do it over the phone. We don't have that value, that benefit anymore.
The iteration of an
Yeah,
idea is what we're talking about here, and the whole
yeah,
concept of SEO going. I can't tell you the number, and you've done the same thing where you've sat with a client, and for some reason or another, we found this way of selling word search.
Yes.
And they ask about that. What words do I need to use? Well, let's back up here. What are you trying
Right.
to say? What are you trying
Right.
to get? What do you have to sell? Is it worthy?
Right.
And can we exploit the worthiness? If it is not worthy, then maybe we ought to think about a different thing. And that's
Totally.
what happens when you get to the top of the heap as opposed to the
Hmm.
interim. You get to the top of the heap, you start asking yourselves, is that something? Is what we do really valuable or not? If it's not, let's not try to trick ourselves. I sat in a large corporation, 100,000 employees and 26 billion in turnover, and you worried about those things that were, are we really spinning wheels here? I mean,
Right.
sounds like a great idea, and somebody sold us, but geez, I'm not. And that's what I find with a lot with SEO. And SEO is really, I think, run full course. So now you move to this whole idea of this generative engine optimization. So
Yeah.
when you get to that, what does a client have to? How do they begin to put that in place? I guess is the question I have, because it seems obvious, but maybe it's not.
It's easy actually, because knowing that the big LLMs, whether it's Microsoft directing it through OpenAI or through Azure or Claude with Anthropic or Gemini, they are mostly focused on news coverage for sources and fact checking. So if you're good about focusing on high authority outlets, or if you can reverse engineer and know, um, this is all public knowledge. You can look up to find out what deals are in place with LLMs and media outlets, then target those media outlets that if that's one of your goals. If one of your goals, if you didn't care about GEO and you actually care about, your clients like, nope, I have to be in the journal. And I want the dot art. I want the above the fold, even though but nobody actually holds a paper anymore. And they want it because it's their main message is to increase shareholder value. That's different. But if your goal is to actually um, put more factual information out on a particular topic, or take a pole position on a topic, or just get greater brand awareness through search, then GEO should be your goal. Then you need to target all of those publishers who have deals with these LLMs to make sure, and you need to pitch those reporters. You need to pitch those journalists because it's going to be more impactful for you.
One of the things that from a marketing perspective, and back in the day, PR was separate and marketing. Well, they're obviously we
Yeah,
realize, they're core. They're together. They are married. They're Siamese twins or whatever you want to call it. And so
sure.
if you're really talking about you're talking about the consumer journey, we're really talking about how do we flag their attention, and then how do we actually get them into consideration set, so that
Hmm.
my idea becomes an element of consideration, and
Right.
then we move to that important one that says, okay, how are we going to move somebody to a purchase? And in public relations, maybe we focused a lot of times about just getting people into consideration set, uh,
Hmm.
when what the client really wants is, yeah, but did you sell anything?
Right.
And that becomes a much more doable thing under these circumstances, doesn't it?
It could, especially if at some point we're able to connect our activities to Salesforce or HubSpot or any of these other CRM systems that many of these companies use. I mean, I use it, but a lot of companies use some sort of CRM to track either, even if it's B2B or B2C, their customers. And for the first time ever, we're able, hopefully, to put our programming and our data inside of that so we can actually see the impact. It comes back to earlier, at the start of this conversation, communications effectiveness.
Yeah. So the
Yeah.
CRMs, they've been around for a long time, and every time I talk to a client about a CRM, and my experience of implementing CRMs is that we have great ideas as to what they're going to do, and we end up, like most software, using about 10% of what it actually can do, and
Yep.
we've
They're
maybe
complicated. Yeah.
they're complicated, and they require a significant amount of interaction of not just the technical aspects of it, but the people aspects of it. So, what
Yep.
is your recommendation to people when they're saying, Aaron, we've got a CRM, we use Salesforce, whoever, and I'm just not seeing what I want to see, and we're using HubSpot, and but what is it that how do you I guess the best question, how do you focus them on saying, yeah, this is what you need to do because I know this is what I see over and over people making the mistake with CRMs or with HubSpot.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not an expert at Salesforce or HubSpot, those what they call instances, but you're right. There are hundreds of different kinds of fields you can fill out and ways to track things. It's super complicated. I would go for the simplest one possible, but I think what we haven't done is on the brand side. The head of PR or somebody inside the comms department function rather needs to reach out. There's always somebody who's in charge of that Salesforce contract, the instances, the access, the fields, how they're using it. And you need to understand how they're using it and how you can be part of their performance workflow so that you can input and they should be able to give you access to input. It's all about, there is a human component. You have to input the information, right? If it's a campaign, if it's 10 media you reached out to, or suddenly, you've been tracking coverage and coverage pops up and it coincides with a bump in the stock or a deal that was just made, you need to be able to put that into the system. So part of it's input and figuring out where do you get into that workflow. There's always someone at every company, sometimes teams of people that are in charge of the CRM.
Yeah, I guess that's where one of the things I think that students in this course, they're executives, they're in companies, they are dealing, that this first
Yes.
thing about being a mid to high level individual is to say, I not only have to have a kind of a global understanding of where the firm is going, but I also need to have a detailed understanding of how my people are asking questions and wondering how do they fit in and what role
Yeah.
should I adopt? What should I do? Where should I take it? So, I mean, that I
Yeah.
think is a constant question. We're looking for that all the time. So
Right. And we're not cross-functional enough. We deal with HR, we deal with legal, but oftentimes we're not dealing with the rest of that marketing function that we need to deal with and be part of.
precisely where I'm going with that. So if you think about the marketing people and they're trying to understand the consumer journey and where that's going and surprise surprise that all of a sudden PR becomes a feature player because they have always had the ear, so to speak,
Yeah.
as opposed to the megaphone, which is
Yeah.
the focus of a lot of marketing people is the mega. That's the only two references I can actually make that are simple. That it's not always about just yelling or repeat.
Hmm.
Or that was maybe a big thing in television days and in frequency and reach and all those formulas that we used. Well, they become a little bit more sophisticated, and it's not only frequency and reach, but it's about how is it that I actually enter the space of the consumer, and I'm really trying to target. I talk to students all the time and clients saying, we have to target, and we have to get much more specific about who is responding or who's most likely to respond to an idea. So, how do you see targeting entering into this that would actually be a crossover bridge to marketing people, saying, I can help you understand how this can all happen so that you can reach who you need to reach? Difficult
It's
question.
a great. Well, it is. I haven't cracked that yet. People often ask, can you put audience data and segmented audience data into your platform so that you know that because how often are you pitching? Someone will be like, "Oh, I want to be in the New York Times," just as an example for earned media, and then let's say you get coverage in the New York Times for your client. Say it's I don't know, a new route for a an airline, um, and then you get coverage in the New York Post, and then what you find out is that actually the New York Post article got way more traction and more clicks onto your website and direct bookings than the New York Times one. So the New York Times one might have been prestigious, but it wasn't performing in the way the New York Post one was. So it'd be nice to know that before you pitch, so you don't waste your time. The client might still say, "I want to be everywhere, and I want to be in the New York Times because, um, the board the board needs to have that exposure."
But
Um, but what we need to be able to do is actually instead of just through the written word doing descriptions of these outlets and who they target, we need actual publisher demographic data that would then reinforce the reason why you're targeting them, not just because of the vanity play, but because, or for valor, but it's actually for performance. And there is a company called Memo that does that. That gives you more publisher data. And it would be what really needs to happen is that publisher data needs to be integrated into some of our pitch systems. And it's not quite there yet, but that would be very cool.
Well, you know that you had a slide in your presentation that says, "How do we stop being so precious and pretentious?"
Yeah,
No, I mean that's not far from what we're talking about here. It's that there is a
it's
lot
totally
of
that.
there's a lot of that in PR, and it actually
So
feeds
much.
the ego of a lot of CEOs and C class people because listen, they are in front of the board. I sat in front of the board. I presented to the board, and they would always have some
Yeah.
of the most ridiculous questions, but they were really important questions to the board.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
Yep.
so it comes down to the outputs and how do we actually get to an outcome through the output. How do we get to that outtake, so to speak, that drives an outcome, and that becomes that whole. There was you had a great slide. WTF? Do we mean
What do we mean? Yeah.
exactly? But give me a little bit of a process, a thought process on that.
Yeah. It came from a lot of agencies and brands are frozen. They don't know where to start. So what I typically, how do you adopt tools inside of, your daily kind of workflow? So then I'll say to them, well, ask yourself 5 questions. What are the things that take a really, really long time to do that I need to do faster? What are the things I really don't like to do? What are the things I'm not doing very well, but I can improve on? It could just be media replacement, right? It could be trade media. It could be extending beyond the trade media, right? It could be that, what are the things that I need um, better understanding around? So it could just be knowledge gaps, understanding jargon in an industry, what have you. Where do I need more creativity, enlightenment, and also how do I better understand what the next trend is before anybody else? Those are just places to start. So the truth is that everything starts with a question, but and in fact, all of your content is going to be answering questions that people are now prompting into um, search bars. We're becoming this like question economy or question driven culture society. So therefore, it could be even that for going back to GEO on your website, you actually need to pose questions and answer them because that is the format in which these LLMs are operating under. So that helps LLMs surface your website, not just media coverage.
Last question. This is kind of one I ask a lot of people is, how do you see your marketing, your stack? What are the elements of your stack that actually get you to where you conduct your business, so to speak, using marketing technology?
Yeah, I mean, we're unusual in that we're also a provider. We are part of a stack or someone's stack. Having said that, our own stack is around things like Salesforce, Zoom Info, obviously our own tools, um, you know, and uh, we also use tools that help summarize large kind of corpuses of data and content. So summarization tools like WordTune and other things. But that's basically it for us because we don't need a lot more than that.
Right.
Um, and because we're part of other people's stacks, otherwise it becomes very meta.
So, Aaron, thank
Yeah.
you very much. I sure appreciate it.
Thank you, Tim.
Very
No
helpful.
worries at all. Enjoy your weekend. We'll
You
we'll be in
too.
touch.
Yeah,
All right.
sounds good. Thank you. Good luck with that yard back there.